Good evening, everyone, and welcome to February's version of Family Law Uncorked. I'm Jen Bordeaux, the Director of Public Relations with New Direction Family Law, and I am joined by two Chris's today. To my left here is Chris Hicks. He's one of the attorneys here with the firm. And to my right is Chris Barr, and I'm going to have him tell you a little bit about himself. So, Chris, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Chris Barr. I am the owner of the Chris Barr Realty Group here in the Raleigh area. I am a divorcee. I was married 15 years and was divorced. I have two kids. I do a lot of work with people who have been divorced with their real estate transactions and what they're going through. I had my own little real estate transaction I had to handle when I got divorced, and so there you go.
Yeah. All kinds of things that go into that.
Yeah.
So today we wanted to talk about dating after divorce. Friday is Valentine's Day in the family law world. By the way, gentlemen, Friday is Valentine's Day, don't forget. Tomorrow is February 13th, which in the family law world is kind of known as Mistress Day. So all kinds of drama can go on. You've never heard that before?
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, Mistress Day. So look at that. There's a thing. Yeah. So we a while back, Elizabeth Stevenson, one of the attorneys here, was originally going to join us, but unfortunately fell sick today. So Chris was sweet enough to step in for her. But she stumbled upon an article through Good Housekeeping that was written by Marissa LaScala and talked about tips for dating after divorce. So all of us have different experiences with dating after divorce, and Chris just has experience with helping people through divorce and all that can come up with that. So we thought that we would just get really real about dating after divorce, the good, bad, and the ugly, some things that you face, legally what that looks like, having a male perspective on what that's like, and myself personally, after having gone through divorce, what some of the things that I've been through, because we know we're not alone, and you guys aren't either, and then we've got the legal pro over here to assist you and give you some tips there and kind of what to face or what to think about, or legally what your rights are when going through that process. So I'm gonna dive right in. First, just kind of about dating apps. Chris, I don't know if you use any dating apps whenever you went through your situation, but I have, and it can be fun. It can be very frustrating. We've had others that have, maybe are a little bit older, 50s and 60s, that are using the dating apps, and the same themes come across as far as being ghosted or being burnt out or feeling like, you get started with a conversation and then online dating is just where conversations go to die. So it can be very frustrating, but I've met several people that have also been very successful in meeting off of dating apps. And Chris, I know that you are now happily remarried. How did you meet your now wife? Was it through online dating or
no,
through
a mutual friend?
Okay, so it still does happen traditionally too. That's good to know. There's hope out there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this article, which is linked in the event, and I can post it in the comments afterwards too for you to read, there were several different tips that were written, and we plucked a few that kind of covered the main theme or things that we thought were really important to focus on when dating after divorce. One of the ones that was mentioned was wait until your divorce or your separation is final before you start dating. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about the personal side of that, or the reality that a lot of people experience, as well as the legal side of that. So Chris, how about you start with the legal side of that and what the attorney would say to that?
So legally, there's no reason that you have to. Practically speaking, there are. But legally, once you're separated in North Carolina, you're separated. We do require a 1 year and a day separation period before you can get divorced, which for a lot of people, that's a long time to be single and not have someone that you're in a relationship with and care about that way. So legally, that's not a requirement. Now, I feel like Good Housekeeping probably had other reasons for recommending that than the legal side. But there is a fine line there, and what I do, advising people legally, but also counseling them personally and their own lives and what's best, especially when you have children involved and things like that as well.
Okay, so when you're talking about in North Carolina, as you mentioned, it's a year. So that can be a long time, especially if you felt like maybe there was a lost connection in the marriage a long time ago, or you should be done with this person, whatever the case may be. So, Chris H, with that separation period, let's say, because you know it's a crazy time in somebody's life whenever they've just initially divorced or they're going through that. What if there are a couple of nights that the ex-spouses kind of get together, maybe a couple of little hookups? Does that mean is there reconciliation there?
No, and since we're being real, I have told people.
We're being authentic.
People ask that question, you know, is it okay to sleep with my ex? And I tell them, nobody knows you as well as they do at this point. But no, the courts have been very clear that isolated incidents of sexual intercourse are not a reconciliation. So if you have a separation agreement, if you are worried about your 1 year period of separation, those isolated incidences are not considered reconciliation.
So what would be some patterns of reconciliation or
really what the court says is holding yourself out to the public. If you're doing events together, if anybody looking at you would think your husband and wife cohabitating is really the main one. Living in the same house together. Those are what the court's going to look to and call reconciliation. That's going to either stop that period of separation or undo certain things in separation agreements. Okay.
And how can, if someone has, not been separated for that long and they do start dating again, even though there's legally nothing saying that you can't start dating during that separation period, what are some of the things you warn against that maybe that could affect, legally that could affect things that go into the separation agreement or court?
Right. So I really look for two things. One is when you have children, because that is a consideration for a court in a custody case. If you're dating and you're having your children interact with your new boyfriend, girlfriend, and they may not be ready for that. They're going through a traumatic time just as you are. And the other thing is if there are concerns, if your ex has concerns that you may have been cheating, jumping into a new relationship may add some fuel to that fire, may give the court something to say, well, maybe that was happening, because the standard is not necessarily I caught them sleeping with this person, it's opportunity and inclination. So, if they think you may have been having an affair with person X, and then you're dating person X 3 days after you separate.
Sure.
May not work out in your favor.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the legal side of things. Now, going to maybe the reality or the personal side of things, I know for me personally, after I was separated, I did not wait the year and a day. I think whenever you're used to being in that, you're used to being in a marriage and having that companionship, it's very hard then to transition to not having that. And so even though maybe mentally, emotionally, you're really not ready just to jump in right away, it's still very attractive, and you think that you want to get back out there and you want to, get back on the horse, or, I don't know, just go out and be doted upon, or whatever the case may be. So I think, personally, it really does depend upon your mental and emotional state whenever you're trying to get back out there and you're meeting new people. Toward dating at that time. Again, I jumped back into it too soon and I felt burnt. I was bitter. That's probably the best word for it. I was bitter. I had assumptions. I had expectations for every person that I met. And it just kind of set me up for success and to not be in a super healthy mental state. So I did start dating someone before that year period was up, and we dated for quite a while, and that was healthy, but that was several months after the actual separation. And I think, too, even if you're someone who you maybe initiated the separation or felt maybe disconnected from your spouse and you were ready for the divorce or the separation, it's still a grieving process you have to go through. You still have to kind of mourn that loss of that relationship or that successful, or the way that sometimes society defines success of being marriage, or it was something that you tried that is now not working out. So both sides, I think there is a grieving process. Like you've got the legal side of it. Chris B., what are your thoughts on that? Because I know, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but I know that, like me, you didn't wait.
No, it's interesting that you said like there's a mourning process, because that was something that I didn't even anticipate. That whole kind of process of having a loss, it was just like the marriage fell apart. And I moved out, and there was kids involved, and it was just like emotionally chaotic. So I think I kind of dove back into the interacting with other people, fairly quick, and a lot of it was just to, Band-Aid what I was going through.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't start actually dating until about like 6 or 7 months after.
Mm-hmm.
And, I met my now wife, like, at that time. So it was, my experience wasn't that I was, dating someone and I would date someone else. It was kind of like this whole little, like, emotional, just, I don't know what you call it, but it was like an upheaval. And, you're going through all this stuff and you don't know what it is. And then I just kind of like landed on my feet, so to speak. But even after that, it was hard. To be in a relationship and going through the heat of a divorce was not easy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it is. I mean, either way, it's stuff that you have to. First of all, we are not mental health professionals or counselors. So, but there's no, there's no perfect timeline, or there's no, for every year that you were married, a month that you should be single kind of thing. So there's no perfect formula for anyone. It's really individual and the work that you put in for yourself. We here recommend everyone go see a counselor or therapist to navigate through the emotional and mental side of that situation, because it is a lot, no matter what spectrum you're on, whether you're both agreeing it's an amicable split or whether there, is one side or whatever the case may be, it's still a lot to process and deal with. And then bring into that having children, and how are we now going to navigate that, and this new custody arrangement, or, kids having 2 homes and everything. So it's a lot. It is a lot. So it really varies from person to person, but it can be very daunting, and it's a roller coaster of emotions once you get back into the dating scene, because of everything that we just talked about. So I'm going to shoot it back over to you, Chris. What do you feel, or have you seen anything with clients that you worked with that maybe have gotten back into the dating scene that then you can just kind of see maybe negative or positive effects from that in going throughout the case, or that it's affected it in any way?
I mean, I've definitely seen both. Sometimes my life is a little harder when there's a new, I don't want to say this in any derogatory way, but new wives and girlfriends make custody cases a little harder from time to time. I've had new boyfriends make cases harder from time to time as well, because it's hard to advise a client when there's someone else telling them, this is how your life should be. Positively though, I've seen people go from a terrible relationship into a decent relationship, and just the boost to the mental health.
Absolutely.
Especially the bad relationships, not even necessarily abusive, they just weigh on people, and you can see when we give them some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, that they're going to be out of this sooner rather than later. People just brighten up, and I mean, it doesn't have to be a fairy tale to even make them feel a little bit better about their outlook when they come into a new relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything?
We
don't have any cases, but I mean, personally,
I was going to agree with that. And I'm not advocating that you have to get into a relationship by any stretch, but I found that once I was in a relationship, that it kind of helps stabilize me going through the process, because I had like a foundation of something that was, and I was very lucky, but something that was healthy, that I could, we could talk about it. So I wasn't wrapped up all the time into the emotional like chaos of the divorce and what was going on. I had kind of and I would advocate for therapy. I think therapy is an incredible thing, and it helped me too. But having that stable relationship that I was going back to definitely helped that process a lot. So, yeah, it was good.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And just touching on that, if anybody's watching that is considering separation and not already going through this, I've been referring people to separation counseling as a couple to help deal with that. If you have any semblance of a relationship left with your spouse, just being able to go to someone to say, have a neutral party and say, this is why I want this, it helps, I think, both sides kind of not make it worse
Sure.
for
And
the other.
to just sidebar off of that, there's actually a specific kind of counseling called discernment counseling that we have recommendations for. We've actually done a prior Facebook Live on it that helps whenever you've got what they call a leaning out and a leaning in spouse. The leaning out is the one that's kind of initiating the separation. The leaning in is like, no, I want to hang on to this. And it's not actual couples therapy, but it is a safe space for the couple to talk to. They get to talk to the therapist individually and then together every single session. And it's a way for both partners to communicate what they're feeling without being accusatory, so to speak, to say like, well, I want out because you X, Y, Z, and like, well, why don't you love me because of X, Y, Z? So it's a very safe space to communicate all of that and decide what's going to happen. There are three options with discernment counseling are either status quo, which I don't think either spouse or party would want that, going into intensive counsel or couples therapy, or heading towards divorce. And so by the end of the discernment counseling, one of those decisions is made, so it's concrete, and then you move forward from there. We've got recommendations for that if you are watching. That's something you're interested in, but that's probably a whole other topic for another another Facebook Live. So
Make a note of that.
yeah. So another tip that this article posed was to set reasonable expectations and be honest about your past. I'm going to touch on reasonable expectations, and then I'm going to throw it to you to talk about being honest about your past. So I know expectations, again, going back to you're used to being in that married companionship mindset. And so I think a lot of people, and I was guilty of this, and I've heard several friends and other acquaintances talk about this, is that you go into the mindset that every person you meet is going to be the one. They're going to be the next person that you marry. And I think those expectations kind of set you up for failure in a way, because you're not meeting the person just to meet them, to find out who they are and to talk and to see what chemistry or compatibility is there. You're literally meet them as the next suitor for the rest of your life, whenever you maybe haven't exactly dealt with the prior one. So just keeping that in mind, the expectations of trying to just go in with it is what it is. You've got a new opportunity to meet a new person. They're meeting you. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like an interview, just hand over the resume. But having that open mind and just accepting it for what it is and being in the moment is what I have found is most helpful. Not easy, but is what I have found is most helpful. So being honest about your past, Chris, what would you say to that? Or what did you have any struggles, I should say, with that, or reservations?
I was very honest with my past, and I was very honest with this, where everything was financially and what caused the separation, divorce, and everything that was going on. But I did that with the people that I felt needed to know that stuff, or I felt had, it definitely wasn't like a billboard behind me.
Right.
But I think that if, I had the decision that if I'm going to be in a relationship and I want the relationship to go somewhere, then I need to set the pace of like, I'm going to do this relationship different. And that had to start with, this is what's going on. Especially because I was right in the middle of it. So our separation negotiations and the divorce proceedings really started like about the same time that I started dating my now wife. So, I was in the heat of the divorce, and I was in a brand new relationship at the exact same time. And, now that I'm thinking about it, I wasn't really aware that those two big things in my life were happening at once. That's what was going on. And so, everything that had happened, I let her know. So I would advise to do it.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, like with the right person that you feel kind of needs to, once it gets to that level, like. Yeah. I don't know that I necessarily,
like the first thing, let me tell you about everything that's going on.
You're like, well, here's my social security number. No. Yeah. I think, and what brings that up is that when Chris and I were first talking about discussing dating after divorce and our experiences with it and just kind of being open and honest, it was one thing, I think in my mind, I know that females think about those things a lot, but Chris was the one who brought up, I was like, wow, I'm meeting this person that I really want to seriously date, and now I really need to let them know all this kinds of stuff. And it was scary, for lack of a better word, or, you know, daunting that you feel like you're bringing all this baggage into this new relationship. And I know in my instance, I don't have children, but going through, you know, going and dating and whenever that conversation comes up, for a while to begin with, it was kind of like an open wound anytime that came up, because people always ask you, you know, have you ever been married? Do you have kids? And it's just standard questions that always get asked during, when, you know, with online dating period. And so it was just I was embarrassed, you know, for, not that anybody looked at me differently, but sometimes there still is a stigma that's associated with divorce, unfortunately. And I was embarrassed. I was ashamed of that. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I was divorced, you know, whatever. But then you get past that. It's just, again, going to a counselor and working through that and knowing that, you know, it's just a time in your life. It doesn't define you, or define your next relationship.
And I don't know if that, you know, when people know that you're divorced, it's obvious that either it was a traumatic situation, something had happened. So I think that I felt a little bit of comfort knowing that, well, this person's sitting here talking to me, asking me these questions. So it's not like I'm telling them something that they hadn't even considered would be in the realm of possibility of what was happening. All divorce, there's relationship and financial and kid, you know, there's something going on. And if I'm in a relationship with someone, you know, the chances of that divorce is being like, oh, we decided to stop being married, but we're still friends, like a Seinfeld breakup.
Yeah.
That's not.
Going back or, you know, so you've been dating this person for a little while, or you maybe you find someone, you know, that you've now been dating for a little bit, you're exclusive, you've had the talk. I liked this point that the article brought up, which was make space for feelings to bubble up. Because I think that if we meet someone new and we start dating them after being in a serious relationship, or, you know, or you know, after being married, that if we start having a nostalgic moment or something, maybe we're comparing to our ex or whatnot, then we don't kind of let that sit with us and work through it and just like own it. It's not permanent, it's temporary. But just expect that's gonna happen, especially, I'm sure, if you're going through the heat of the divorce and, you know, the negotiations of a separation. I mean, that's full front in your mind.
Right.
And so it doesn't, I just think sometimes people think that, okay, well, maybe I don't need to be with this new person now because these feelings are popping back up, or I'm having this, you know, like I said, this nostalgia. So I thought that was a good point, in that allow yourself that room to breathe and understand that that's going to happen and it's normal, but it doesn't mean that you're stepping all the way back and you're reverting and that you aren't ready to move on. Anything that either of you would like to add to that? That was just a fun little point that resonated with me. Okay, all right. Moving on, Chris.
All right.
The other Chris. Another point that I really liked was don't rush into introducing family to a new partner, especially kids. From the legal standpoint, what would you like to add to that?
I can't stress that enough. Yes, you're a parent. Yes, you have your children's best interest at heart, but kids deal with divorce differently than adults, and courts are very keenly aware of that and very protective over that, to the extent that anything in a custody order could be considered a standard provision. You know, not introducing children to a significant other until you've been in a relationship for 6 consecutive months monogamously is, you know, I've seen it in hundreds of orders. Allowing your ex a chance to meet your new, you know, significant other, if they want to. I mean, those are their kids too. You know, they should, at least to the extent, you know, not necessarily that they have a right to object to who you're dating, but they, you know, have a right to know who their kids are around. But courts are going to look at that. You know, if you come into court for a temporary custody hearing and you've got your, you know, girlfriend of 3 weeks living in the house, you know, where you have your kids every other week, it's probably not going to go so well. So be very, very careful about that. Not necessarily just because the kids are going through this transition period of mom and dad are separated, but also they're going to get attached to whoever you're bringing in as well. It's only natural for kids, especially younger kids. And if you're not sure about that relationship, don't have them there, because they're going to get attached. And if it doesn't work out, you're going to be dealing with that, you know, all over again.
It's not just your heart that's breaking.
Exactly.
You got those kids too. And so along with that, and I know that there are a lot of different factors when it comes into what could happen if. But you mentioned like either in the separation agreement or court order, if those terms are in there as to waiting X amount of days or no overnight partners or, during custodial time, what could happen in a very broad overview, what could happen if somebody's not following that order or that separation agreement?
Well, a court order and separation agreement are gonna be treated differently. But a court order, especially if you're violating that, you're, facing a contempt charge. Imprisonment for 30, 60, 90 days, however the court wants to do it.
Depending on how the judge is feeling that day.
Yeah, attorney's fees, censure, fines, follow your court order, please,
Yeah.
please.
Or if someone's not following the court order, make sure you contact an attorney
Then you
to
can
talk
call me,
about it.
yes.
Yeah, then you can call Chris. And then what about, you talked about there's a difference between the order and a separation agreement. So if someone's not following a separation agreement.
Yeah, so just broad strokes, a separation agreement's a contract. I always tell people it's no different than if they hire me to paint their house. If it's violated, you have to sue for breach of contract. Now, custody and child support are both different in that you can always take that to court. But for violation alone, you'd have to sue for breach of contract.
So kind of big things. You can kind of see why there's also the hesitancy in jumping into a relationship too quickly after divorce too, just for the legal side of things and the headache that all of that can cause as well. So from the non-legal side, anything for you that you want to chime in or add to that?
We very quickly decided that, and I forgot exactly what the time frames were, but like we couldn't introduce our kids to anyone we were dating till we've been seeing them for 9 months. So that was something, and then it was, we couldn't live with the other person if it was a year. I actually don't really remember, but I do remember the 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And even with that, because the kids were aware that I was dating somebody, and even with that awareness, it still caused, especially with my older child, it caused difficulties with her, and that took longer. So in my case, my wife, my not wife, when I was dating her, had met and built a relationship with my younger child first, and then it wasn't until much later that my older was ready to meet her and stuff. So with all the precautions and everything that we were doing, and it was very conscious, but still was not easy. It was still difficult. So
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned that point of it being difficult. Again, because if you found somebody that, you're in a serious relationship with, I'm sure you're excited and you want your kids to meet them. And you're excited at that point. And that's whenever I think you got to take a step back and really focus on the kids at that point. You got to put them before you in that relationship, as hard as it may be. And that's coming from a perspective of having a dog as my child, but I'm very protective as to who she meets too.
the kids have been through enough, especially my experience. The kids have been through enough trauma. I know me emotionally was going through enough that just to add another layer to that, that was not an option. So I would really advise that when the kids are involved to really baby step that. And therapy is a great thing.
Yeah.
So for the kids too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
definitely. And I think too, therapy for the parents, individually, to learn how to communicate to their kids about this, about introducing a new partner, or even at the beginning of a separation, of how to approach that with the kids and explain that, especially with varying age ranges of what they're going to understand and be able to comprehend and how to treat that going forward. So definitely therapist.
And I'm very clear with people too. When you get to me, and when we step through those courthouse doors, the court does not care about you on a custody case. They only care about those children.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, the court can't tell you that you can't spend the night with your new boyfriend or girlfriend, but they can tell you what you're going to do when you have those kids. And if that's what you want to do, they can tell you you're just not going to have those kids. So keep that in mind. You are taking a backseat to everyone pretty much once you have a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. definitely. Well, the last point that I'll just touch on quickly so we can wrap this up. But above all else, I think I just wrote down trust your gut was one of the tips, and there were 12 different tips in this article. And please go back to the link, and I can add it here again later, and read these 12 tips if you're looking at this or starting to get back into the dating scene. But I thought this was a good one of above all else, trust your gut, because I think whenever you go through separation or divorce, you start to question a lot of things. What to do going forward, what went wrong in the past, am I worthy of dating, and just all these different things, which again brings in the whole therapist aspect to help you get through all of that as well. But don't lose sight of that intuition. If you're meeting a new person, because online dating can be a little scary too, because you have these conversations with people and then you go to meet them in person, kind of like a blind date. But so just trust your gut. If there's any red flags, probably for a reason. Being honest about everything, especially when it gets to that point. And also listening to yourself. If we had several videos ago, we had a traditional matchmaker on here, and she talked about dating fatigue and burnout. And I think with the access to so much swiping left or right or whatever the app does, it's access to a lot of people. And so maybe if you go on a few dates and it doesn't work out or you're feeling down, but you keep on at it, there is apparently such a thing as dating fatigue or dating burnout. So listen to yourself when that happens. Take a step back, reevaluate, get to a clean, healthy place with yourself, before then, and then, having a fresh mindset of diving back in. Try not to compare to your ex. That was another thing about listening to your gut. They're your ex for a reason. Naturally, we do tend to compare because that's our basis and that's what we've known. So I think that's going to happen a little bit, but just try not to fix what was wrong in your past relationship with the new person that you're dating. I guess is maybe a better way to say it than comparing them to your ex.
I mean, I've got one particular client right now who I've seen a huge transition in from a bad relationship into really finding herself. And I think as opposed to comparing to your ex, it's more, what she and I have talked about is learning about yourself. The things that you like, the things you'll tolerate, the things you won't tolerate. And rather than comparing each situation, find what you want. And we see all age ranges here. But what I tend to see is that relationships are cyclical. You have these early 20s, mid 20s where everybody's getting married, everybody's at a wedding every other weekend, and then you have a period where everybody's married, and then there's a period where you start seeing your friends get divorced and get separated. So it comes back around. It's just important not to compare, not to settle.
Sure. Yeah. I think lean into yourself for that happiness. I think we can get complacent in relationships and we depend on that other person to provide us with happiness. And I think that's an unfair burden to place on somebody else. So just, finding that happiness within yourself, whatever that looks like, whether that's traveling or whether it's journaling or, meeting new friends or starting a new fitness routine, whatever the case may be, fantasy football, who knows? But whatever makes you happy so that then whenever you meet somebody else, they're just a complement to your happiness as opposed to the source of your happiness. So, and all of that starts with, just taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, and it can be tough out there, but just stay strong. And if you have any other thoughts to wrap up as we wrap up, to add to it? All right. Well, thank you both for joining me this evening. And if you have any follow-up questions, as Chris said, he's the realtor. He's helped people going through divorce. He had to deal with his own real estate situation when he went through a divorce. And then obviously we've got the other Chris, who is a family law attorney here at New Direction. So if you have any questions surrounding that, or just want to chat about dating after divorce, please reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you. And you can reach out to us via social media avenues, websites, or you can go old school and actually call the office at 919-719-3470. Chris, if somebody would like to get a hold of you, what's the best avenue for that?
They can call me or text me at 919-971-4379. My email address is chris@chrisbarrealtygroup.com.
Perfect. Well, again, gentlemen, thank you so much. Next month we'll be talking about prenups. So tune in if you want to learn a little bit more about the wonderful world of prenups. They're not just for celebrities. Thanks for watching it tonight, guys.